Imagine waking to the sound of your own scream and realizing it isn't coming from your lungs anymore. Imagine opening your eyes to a sky made of broken glass and hearing laughter that seems to peel apart the edges of your sanity. Now imagine really knowing that this new place is not hell, because hell would be merciful compared to this. This is Kamara, the dark city of the Drukhari, where suffering is not a byproduct of existence but the oxygen its people breathe. Before we go further, pause for a moment and ask yourself, in a universe built on unending war and uncontainable terror, what does it mean to be truly doomed? Today you will follow the last days, or perhaps the last flickering hours, of a human servant caught in the endless torment inflicted by the Dark Eldar masters he serves. His name no longer matters. The Dark Eldar never cared to learn it. He is thrall. He is property. He is a disposable part of an empire far older and infinitely more sadistic than anything humankind has nightmares about. The story that follows is not exaggerated. It is not embellished. If anything, it is a diluted glimpse of horrors too vast to translate into words. But you will feel what he feels. You will see what he sees, and you will understand why the most fragile thing in Kamara is not a slave's body, but the last remaining thread of his sanity. Before we begin this descent into unfiltered horror, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from right now? Because I promise you this, after hearing what Thrall endured, the world around you is going to feel a little safer, a little brighter and far less predictable than you thought. Thrall's story begins in a corridor that was never meant to be walked by mortals. Imagine a hallway carved from obsidian that pulses like a living artery. Imagine a darkness so complete it feels wet, sticking to your skin like oil, refusing to let you pass without paying some unseen toll. In this place, gravity shifts without warning. Sound travels in strange directions, and the architecture itself seems to dislike the presence of a human. Thrall walks quickly because walking too slowly makes the walls whisper in a language that gnaws at the base of his spine. He carries a crystalline censer, trembling slightly as the shifting fumes inside swirl with predatory intent. Behind him, the thunderous footfalls of the Archon he serves echo like metallic heartbeats. Archon Velithrax does not speak yet. He does not need to. Every breath Thrall takes is borrowed permission. They emerge from the passage into a grand chamber filled with cages, if one can call dimensional fractures and shimmering warp nets cages. Inside them, creatures that should not exist stretch against their bonds, each movement producing a sound too horrific for mortal throats. A lesser human might freeze at the sight. Thrall does not because he is brave, but because fear is a luxury he had surgically stripped from him during his first weeks of captivity. When Velithrax gestures, Thrall opens the censer. Scent spills out like vaporous hunger, drifting toward the dimensional tears. Something begins to growl. Something begins to come through. And Thrall knows that if he survives this day, it won't be because fate favored him. It will be because whatever emerges wants his master more than it wants him. The Chimera bursts forth first. It always does. A creature of shifting forms and constantly mutating anatomy, it screeches in 3 tones at once, lunging straight for Velithrax like a living tidal wave of madness. The Archon laughs, a sound that chills Thrall deeper than any scream could. To Velithrax, this is not combat. This is art. He meets the beast mid-lunge, blade humming with forbidden energies that ripple the air itself. In a single fluid motion, as elegant as a dancer's pivot, he cleaves the thing in half. The Chimera's blood never touches the ground. The warp devours it before gravity has a chance. The Archon's laughter lingers, softening into an unsettling exhale of satisfaction. That sound haunts Thrall more than the violence that caused it. Because to the Drukhari, satisfaction is fleeting. And when the high of cruelty fades, they crave more. They seek new sensations, new torments, new amusements, preferably from those beneath them. Thrall backs away, head bowed, desperately erasing his presence. But Velithrax's helmet turns slightly, following the subtle motion of his fear like a predator tasting blood in water. For a moment, an awful possibility hangs in the air. One misstep, one twitch too slow, and the Archon might decide to carve open Thrall's chest just to see how terror changes the rhythm of a human heart. But then Velithrax simply wipes his blade, turns his back and walks deeper into the fortress. Thrall exhales slowly, heart pounding. He lived. Again. But there is no triumph in survival, only the heavy dread of knowing the Drukhari never leave a toy unbroken for long. And with every passing hour, Thrall senses the Archon's interest shifting toward him. Not as a servant, not as a possession, but as entertainment. Later, when the screams in the arena died down and the torches of pale witchlight flickered low, Thrall returned to the tasks assigned to him. His hands, raw from scrubbing blood that should not have existed in this dimension, shook as he wiped the last remnants from the tile. The moment his eyes drifted away, a soft voice whispered from the shadows. "You should stop cleaning." "He won't care." Thrall turned sharply. Another human, skin grayish from prolonged agony, hair matted, eyes still holding a glimmer of something unmistakably human, hope, madness, maybe both. "I've seen that look," the stranger said, nodding toward where Velithrax had stood hours earlier. "Your Archon is bored." The stranger gave a disturbing laugh, as though amusement was the only remaining thread keeping him from collapsing into hysterics. "Boredom means he's thinking of sending you to the homunculi covens. They love fresh minds. Yours still looks intact." Thrall froze. The homunculi were artists in the same way a murderer might call himself a sculptor. They did not kill. They reshaped, resculpted, converted bodies into instruments, souls into volatile reagents of pain. "No one survives the covens," Thrall whispered. "No," the stranger corrected, stepping forward. "No one escapes unchanged." A silence settled between them. A heavy, dangerous silence broken only by distant screams. Then the stranger leaned closer. "You should run." Thrall stared at him as if the man had spoken in Eldar. "Run? In Kamara? Run where?" But the stranger only smiled before slipping back into the dark, leaving behind a single word that echoed louder than the screams. "Away." Thrall returned to his cell long after the arena had emptied. The corridors twisted unnaturally, shifting as if alive and impatient. He walked with the careful gait of one who knew that even the floor might lash out with barbed intent. When he finally arrived at the tiny space the Drukhari generously called a cell, he sat against the cold metal wall and attempted to quiet his breathing. But the stranger's words drilled deeper. "Away, away, away." Each repetition felt like a forbidden mantra. Slaves didn't run in Kamara. They didn't dream. They didn't imagine choices. The Dark City was a labyrinth, designed to prevent escape not through walls and chains, but by breaking the mind into accepting that escape itself was impossible. Thrall had accepted that truth long ago, or he thought he had, but tonight something shifted. He found himself listening not to the sounds of torture echoing through the fortress, but to the gaps between those sounds, the moments where everything held still, as though the city blinked. Those gaps were small, insignificant, but they existed. Thrall's pulse quickened. For the first time in years, he considered the possibility, however absurd, that escape was not entirely beyond imagination, not freedom, not salvation, just movement, just a way. The more he tried to suppress the thought, the sharper it became. He pressed his head against the wall, breathing harder, as though fighting an unseen hand trying to pry open the cage inside his skull. Then somewhere deep within Kamara, a shift of metal echoed like the snapping of a chain, and Thrall felt it, a sliver of opportunity, a microscopic fracture in inevitability. Tomorrow, he decided, he would run, or he would die trying. Either fate felt more merciful than what awaited him in the homunculi's hands. The next day began like every other. Thrall woke to the shriek of distant victims being flayed to amuse the Cavillite elite. He ate nothing, slaves did not eat unless their masters decided hunger weakened the flavor of their suffering. He presented himself before Velithrax, who inspected him with the cold apathy one might give a tool that was beginning to dull. Thrall lowered his head, but inside a storm churned. Today he would escape. Today he would gamble everything. The risk was monumental, the consequences catastrophic, but the alternative was an eternity that made death desirable. Archon Velithrax turned to him, expression unreadable behind his helmet. "Fetch the vials," he commanded. Thrall obeyed, retrieving the glass cylinders filled with shimmering soul ink. But as he turned back, he caught it, a flicker, a subtle yet unmistakable twist of the Archon's posture. Velithrax was looking at him differently today, not as a servant, not as chattel, but as raw material ready for transformation. The homunculi wanted him. Thrall felt his blood turn to ice. The decision snapped into place with perfect clarity. He had to move now, before Velithrax issued the order that would seal his fate. As the Archon walked toward the balcony overlooking the fortress courtyard, his attention momentarily elsewhere, Thrall dropped the vials. The sound shattered the moment. Velithrax turned sharply, annoyance crackling in the air like static. Thrall ran. Instinct took over. He sprinted down the corridor, lungs burning, mind screaming at him to keep moving even as death raced behind him in the form of an Eldar's accelerating footsteps. Thrall did not look back, because in Kamara, looking back was an invitation to die. The city greeted his escape attempt with cruel enthusiasm. The moment he crossed into the outer corridors of the fortress, the architecture seemed to twist, shifting its geometry as if offended by his audacity. Hallways elongated, then compressed. Doors vanished, then reappeared behind him. Every shadow looked like a hand reaching out. Every flicker of light felt like the gaze of a predator. Thrall's lungs felt aflame, but terror propelled him. He darted through a market square filled with Drukhari merchants trading living bodies the way humans traded coins. A witch cult gladiatrix paused mid-negotiation to smirk at the sight of a fleeing slave. "Run faster," she purred as though encouraging prey. Thrall pushed harder. Bolter-like shots cracked behind him, splinter fire. Velithrax's guards had spotted him. The shards of poisoned crystal shredded the air near his head, embedding into walls and stone. One grazed his arm, sending a burning numbness through half his body. But adrenaline drowned the sting. He turned a corner and found himself at the edge of a skywalk bridge suspended over a chasm so deep it contained entire districts. Kamara stretched below like a nightmarish ocean of lights, screams and impossible shapes. Running across would expose him completely. Turning back meant certain capture. Behind him, the shriek of cavalcade boots thundered closer. Thrall sprinted across the bridge. A blast struck the support wire above, making the walkway shudder violently. He stumbled, nearly sliding off into the abyss. But he recovered, throwing himself forward as the bridge behind him collapsed in a catastrophic roar. The Kabbalites halted, unwilling to leap into the void after him. For the first time since his enslavement, Thrall breathed air untainted by orders. He was alive. Not safe, not free, but alive. Thrall slipped into the underlevels of Kamara, the places even the Drukhari rarely ventured unless they required something particularly vicious. Here the air smelled of chemicals and decay. Here the walls bore ancient scars carved by creatures better left unimagined. Thrall's footsteps echoed too loudly, but silence brought its own dangers. As he navigated the labyrinth of pipes, catwalks, and strange biomechanical structures, he began to hear it, whispers, not from other slaves, not from Drukhari, from the city itself. Kamara was alive in ways no human mind was meant to process. It fed on suffering, it exhaled fear, and now sensing prey it whispered to him, offering illusions of sanctuary, of exits that were never truly exits, of pathways that looped into themselves like predatory traps. Thrall pressed forward, ignoring the hallucinations clawing at the edges of his vision. His body trembled from exhaustion and unfiltered dread, but he continued moving, guided only by the primal instinct to survive. Then from the gloom a familiar shape emerged, the stranger from the arena. "You're actually doing it," the man said, surprised and amused. "Most slaves accept death before they attempt escape." Thrall gasped for breath. "Help me." The stranger tilted his head, studying him like a scientist observing a rare experiment. "You don't understand," he said softly. "There is no freedom here. Only directions of suffering, but there is a place ahead where the walls thin, a portal. Its destination changes. Sometimes it leads deeper into the dark city. Sometimes it leads to open void. Sometimes," he hesitated, "sometimes it leads elsewhere." Thrall didn't wait for more explanation. He ran past him. The stranger called after him. "If you reach it, remember this. The price of escape is never less than the cost of staying." But Thrall had no more room in his mind for riddles. He ran toward the unknown. He found the portal in a cavernous chamber lit by pulsating violet energy. It hovered like a wound torn open in reality, edges shimmering with unstable warp light. Thrall's heart pounded so violently he thought his ribs might crack. Behind him he heard distant voices, Drukhari voices closing in. He stepped closer. The air hummed, buzzing against his skin like an electrical storm. He could feel something on the other side. Darkness, yes, but not the cruel and sentient darkness of Kamara. Something colder. Something indifferent, a void that did not care if he lived or died. A void that might ignore him entirely. He preferred that to the absolute certainty of torment. But as he reached out, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. Archon Velithrax, silent, terrifying, deceptively calm. "You almost amused me," Velithrax said, voice smooth as broken glass. "Almost." Thrall's body shook violently. He tried to pull away, but the Archon's grip tightened with effortless strength, crushing bone and muscle. Velithrax leaned closer. Hope is the sweetest flavor, he whispered, and you carried its scent. In that instant, Thrall understood. He was doomed. The portal was inches away. Freedom, however ephemeral, was within reach, but Velithrax would not allow it. Not when Thrall's fear had ripened so beautifully. Not when his suffering had become a delicacy. With the last strength left in his battered body, Thrall twisted, throwing his full weight toward the portal. Velithrax's grip held for a moment. But a moment was all Thrall needed. His shoulder dislocated with a sickening crack, and he slipped free, tumbling into the shimmering tear. Velithrax reached after him, but the portal convulsed violently and snapped shut. Thrall fell into darkness. The fall seemed to last forever. No ground, no walls, no gravity. Just an endless plunge through a dimension that felt neither hot nor cold, neither empty nor full. Thrall felt the threads of his consciousness fray as the warp scraped its talons across the remnants of his sanity. He wanted to scream, but sound did not exist here. He wanted to breathe, but air had become a forgotten concept. The darkness twisted, curled, shifted, and then, light blinding white cold, he crashed onto hard metal. His body crumpled, nerves firing uncontrollably. Slowly, painfully, he forced his eyes open. A ship interior. Human architecture. Crude industrial familiar. He had escaped Kamara. He had actually escaped. Footsteps approached. Heavy, armored, militaristic. A figure loomed above. Him, a trooper in flak armor. Blaze gun holstered, expression stunned. "Emperor's mercy," the soldier whispered. "Where in the void did you come from?" Thrall tried to answer, but only a broken rasp escaped his lips. More soldiers arrived, weapons raised. Shocked to find a half-dead slave appearing out of thin air, they lifted him carefully, cautiously. He felt himself being carried. He felt warmth again. He felt human voices. He felt something he had not felt in decades. Safety? No, but the absence of malice. And as his eyes fluttered closed, just before consciousness slipped away, Thrall understood the truth. He had traded one form of doom for another, but at least this new doom did not relish his suffering. At least this doom might forget he existed. At least in this doom he could die a human, not a toy. If you want the next chapter of Thrall's fate, what becomes of him after escaping the dark? Eldar, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and comment if you want part 2. Your support keeps these Warhammer deep dive stories alive.